feeling out of control isn't a mindset problem. It's a math problem. And there is a very specific difference between those two things. A mindset problem needs affirmations, needs you to think differently. A math problem needs the actual ratio changed, the ratio between what's genuinely outside your control and what you've simply stopped bothering to control, because somewhere along the way, it started to feel like none of it mattered anyway. 7 habits. None of them fix the actual uncontrollable parts of your life, the traffic, the economy, other people's decisions. What they fix is everything you quietly gave up trying to control alongside all of that, the small, genuinely controllable pieces that got swept into the same pile of things I can't do anything about simply because they were sitting too close to the parts that actually were out of your hands. Stay with me until habit number 7, because number 7 is the one that explains why the other 6 create a lasting sense of control instead of a brief, temporary one that fades by the next stressful week. Without it, you'll feel better for a few days. With it, this becomes a permanent shift in how much of your life actually runs through your own hands versus everyone else's. But first, habit number 3 is the one that's going to surprise you, because it involves deliberately shrinking your focus down to something almost absurdly small, and that shrinking turns out to be the exact thing that makes the feeling of control come back fastest. Let's begin. Most of us think about control the wrong way. We treat it as something you either have or don't have, an all-or-nothing state tied to how manageable our entire life currently feels. When enough genuinely uncontrollable things pile up, a hard week at work, a health scare, a piece of bad news, we tend to generalize that sense of helplessness across everything, including the dozens of small things we actually could still control perfectly well, if we hadn't quietly stopped bothering. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control, the degree to which you attribute outcomes in your life to your own actions versus outside forces, and research on it consistently finds that people who maintain a strong internal locus of control, even during genuinely difficult periods, report significantly lower stress and higher well-being than people with an equally difficult external situation but a more external locus of control. Japan's approach to daily structure has, for generations, quietly reinforced an internal locus of control through small, deliberate habits rather than through any single grand act of willpower. There's a word for this broader orientation: jiritsu, self-reliance, self-governance, the capacity to manage and direct your own affairs, cultivated not through big declarations, but through consistent small practice. 7 habits. Each one small enough to feel almost trivial on its own. Each one a tiny, deliberate act of reclaiming something that was genuinely yours to control the entire time. Let's go through every single one. You've probably heard make your bed as generic productivity advice and mentally filed it away as too small to actually matter. Stay with me, because the mechanism behind why this works has nothing to do with bed specifically, and understanding it changes what you choose to do with those first 10 minutes. Here's the mechanism. Self-efficacy, your belief in your own ability to produce an outcome through your own action, isn't built primarily through big accomplishments. Research on self-efficacy consistently finds that it compounds through repeated, small, completed actions, specifically because each small completion provides direct, immediate evidence that your actions produce results. The task itself barely matters. What matters is that it's entirely within your control, has a clear start and finish, and gets completed before anything uncontrollable, an email, a piece of news, another person's demand on your time, has a chance to enter the day first. Starting the day with any genuinely uncontrollable input instead, checking a chaotic inbox, scrolling a feed full of things entirely outside your influence, means your very first data point of the day is "the world acts on me," before you've had a single chance to prove the opposite is also true. The shift, the same 10 minutes, spent completing one small controllable task instead of absorbing the first uncontrollable input of the day, sets an entirely different baseline for how much agency you feel for the rest of the day, not because the task itself matters, but because of what completing it, first, proves. That is habit number 1. Now, habit number 2 is where this gets interesting, because it addresses something most people treat as unavoidable background noise rather than an actual choice. Most people absorb news and information in an unstructured, continuous stream throughout the day, a headline glimpsed here, a notification there, an algorithm-fed scroll whenever there's a spare moment. This feels like staying informed. Structurally, it's closer to a steady drip of uncontrollable input, almost none of which you can act on in any direct way. Here's the mechanism. The vast majority of news content concerns events entirely outside any individual's personal control: geopolitics, distant disasters, decisions made by people you'll never meet. Research on media consumption and perceived control has found that continuous, unstructured exposure to this kind of content is associated with elevated feelings of helplessness and anxiety, distinct from the actual informational value gained, largely because the brain doesn't neatly separate things I'm aware of from things I feel some responsibility to have influence over. A steady stream of uncontrollable input, absorbed all day, quietly trains a generalized sense that most of what's happening around you is simply happening to you. A fixed, contained window, checking news once or twice at set times, rather than continuously, doesn't reduce how informed you are in any meaningful way. It removes the ambient, all-day drip of uncontrollable input that's been quietly reinforcing an external locus of control every single hour it goes unmanaged. The shift, the same total amount of news consumed, contained within one or two fixed windows instead of spread continuously across the whole day, produces meaningfully less of the generalized helplessness that comes specifically from ambient, unstructured exposure. The information itself doesn't change, only its shape does. That is habit number 2. Now, habit number 3, the one I mentioned at the start, the one about deliberately shrinking your focus. Slow down here, because I know what you're thinking, that a single tidy drawer can't possibly matter when the rest of your life feels chaotic. Here's what it's actually doing, and why the smallness of the space is the entire point rather than a limitation. Here's the mechanism. When an entire environment feels overwhelming, attempting to control all of it at once tends to fail, precisely because the scope is too large to manage with the limited time and energy available during an already stressful period, and a failed attempt at broad control tends to reinforce the exact sense of helplessness it was meant to fix. A single small space, deliberately chosen because it's genuinely manageable, works differently. It becomes what's sometimes described in behavioral psychology as a controllable anchor, a concrete, physical proof point that total order is achievable, at least somewhere, entirely through your own effort, with no dependency on anyone or anything else. This single space isn't meant to solve the broader chaos. It's meant to give you one place your eyes and hands can go, reliably, where the answer to "do I have control here" is always, unambiguously, yes, a small, stable reference point the rest of a chaotic day can be measured against. The shift: you don't need your entire environment under control to feel a genuine sense of control. You need one small, completely reliable space that proves, physically and repeatedly, that your own effort still produces order, evidence a chaotic week can't quietly erase. That is habit number 3. Now, habit number 4, and this one is about a specific word most people have quietly stopped using. Most people's calendars and obligations accumulate passively. A request comes in, saying yes is the path of least resistance, and over time, the calendar fills with commitments that were never actually chosen so much as they were simply not refused. Here's the mechanism. Every accepted obligation you didn't genuinely want represents a small transfer of control from you to someone else's request, repeated dozens of times across weeks and months. This transfer compounds into a life that can start to feel like it's being directed by other people's priorities rather than your own, even though each individual yes felt small and reasonable in the moment. A single, deliberate no to something genuinely non-essential, practiced regularly, not as a rare act of rebellion but as an ordinary weekly habit, directly reverses that transfer, one instance at a time. This isn't about becoming unhelpful or unreliable. It's about the deliberate practice of the muscle itself. Regularly exercising the choice to decline something reclaims the felt sense that your time is actually yours to allocate, a sense that erodes quietly with every reflexive yes and doesn't come back on its own without some active practice pushing the other direction. The shift: the same calendar, with one non-essential obligation declined deliberately each week instead of accepted by default, restores a felt sense of authorship over your own time, not because the math changes dramatically, but because the habit of choosing, rather than defaulting, is itself the thing being rebuilt. That is habit number 4. Now, habit number 5, and this one addresses something most modern work and life habits actively work against. Multitasking is often worn as a badge of productivity, but the actual felt experience of juggling several things simultaneously, several browser tabs, several half-finished tasks, attention split across all of them, has a specific, well-documented relationship with the feeling of being out of control, distinct from whether the tasks themselves ever actually get done. Here's the mechanism. Cognitive research on task switching has consistently found that the brain doesn't truly process multiple tasks in parallel. It rapidly switches between them, and each switch carries a small cost in both time and a subjective sense of fragmented attention. Beyond the efficiency loss, this fragmentation produces a specific psychological effect. Multiple open, unfinished tasks held simultaneously in working memory generate a background hum of incompleteness across all of them at once, a diffuse version of the Zeigarnik effect that makes even a productive day feel scattered and hard to feel actual command over. Deliberately working one task through to a real stopping point before beginning the next, rather than holding several simultaneously open, produces a felt sense of completion and command that multitasking, even when equally productive by the numbers, consistently fails to provide. The shift, the same total work, done one task at a time to a genuine stopping point instead of several tasks tracked simultaneously, produces a completely different subjective sense of control over the day. The output can be nearly identical, the felt experience of authorship over it is not. That is habit number 5. Now, habit number 6, and this addresses a specific mental habit almost nobody does explicitly, even though it takes less than a minute. This is a deliberately simple practice, a quick, literal list, split into 2 columns, taking less than a minute. What's genuinely within your control today? What genuinely isn't? Here's why this explicit separation matters more than it seems. Left unexamined, controllable and uncontrollable concerns tend to blur together in the mind. A genuinely uncontrollable worry, like how a difficult conversation will ultimately land with someone else, sits in the same undifferentiated mental space as a genuinely controllable one, like whether you prepare thoughtfully for that conversation. Research on cognitive behavioral approaches to anxiety consistently finds that explicitly separating controllable from uncontrollable elements of a worry, writing it out, rather than only thinking it, measurably reduces the anxiety generated by the uncontrollable portion, largely because the mind stops treating the entire undifferentiated worry as something requiring equal vigilance. The shift, the same day, with its genuinely controllable and uncontrollable elements written out and separated instead of left blurred together in your head, allows your energy to actually flow toward the column where it can produce a result, instead of being spent equally, and mostly uselessly, worrying about both columns at once. That is habit number 6. Now, habit number 7, the one I told you at the very start makes all 6 of the others last. Stay here, because this is the most important thing in this entire video. This last one isn't a habit in the same sense as the other 6. It's the structural condition that determines whether they become permanent, or whether they quietly fade the way most feel more in control attempts eventually do, once the initial motivation that started them wears off. Here's what I mean. Every habit above can be attempted through willpower alone, consciously remembering to do the small task first, consciously checking the news only at set times, consciously choosing one task at a time. Willpower-driven habits share a specific, well-documented weakness: they degrade under stress, precisely at the moments they'd be most valuable, because willpower itself is a depletable resource that stress consumes fastest. The more durable version treats environment, not willpower, as the actual mechanism, sometimes described through the broader idea of Kankayo, environment, shaping behavior more reliably than intention does. A phone with news apps removed from the home screen doesn't require willpower to avoid ambient scrolling, the environment already did the work. A single drawer kept permanently empty and ready makes habit 3 self-sustaining rather than something to remember. A calendar with a standing weekly prompt to decline one thing removes the need to consciously recall habit 4. Each environmental change, made once, removes the need for that specific willpower expenditure indefinitely, the same way a Kajai-marked doorway removes the need to consciously decide to leave stress behind. The structure itself does the reminding. The shift, you don't need the willpower to consciously choose all 6 of the previous habits, fresh, every single day, for the rest of your life. You need to change your environment once, in 6 small ways, so that choosing them becomes the default rather than the effort, and defaults, unlike willpower, don't run out under stress. That is habit number 7. Here is everything in one breath. Complete one small controllable task before anything uncontrollable enters your day. Contain your news and information intake to fixed windows, not continuous exposure. Keep one small space in total, reliable order as your control anchor. Decline one non-essential request every week, deliberately. Work one task at a time to a genuine stopping point. Separate what's controllable from what isn't, in writing, every morning. And redesign your environment so all 6 become defaults, not daily acts of willpower. 7 habits. None of them fix what's genuinely outside your control. All 7 fix what quietly got swept into that same pile without ever actually belonging there. You haven't lost control of your life. You've simply stopped exercising it in a few small, specific, entirely recoverable places, while the genuinely uncontrollable parts of the world convinced you the whole thing was out of your hands. It never was, not entirely. Now you have 7 small ways to prove that to yourself again, starting today. So here's what I want from you before you close this video. Right now, tell me in the comments which one of these 7 your life is most missing. Is it number 1, does your day usually start with something uncontrollable, before you've completed a single thing on your own terms? Is it number 4, can you remember the last time you actually said no to something you didn't want to do? Is it number 7, have you tried habits like these before, only through willpower, without ever changing anything about the environment around them? Tell me the number, 1 through 7, in the comments right now, because naming it is the first step, and someone reading your comment might recognize their own life in it and finally decide to change it starting today. If this changed how you think about control, send it to the one person you know who's been saying lately that everything feels like too much. They're 7 small, specific habits away from remembering how much of it was actually still theirs to direct the whole time. I'll see you in the next one.